Okay, I can't hold the mic, but I'll talk to this hand, I suppose. Hi, Ben. So let me preface this a little bit, and bear with me here, because this might take a minute or so for me to fully outline. But so ever since I've made initial contact with the ideas stemming from the radical left, I've initially had a disliking to them. But they're distasteful. I don't really like them, and I've been obsessed with these ideas for north of 5 years now. And I've been listening to you and other people like you, people like Jordan Peterson, right? Mm-hmm. People on that sort of aisle of things, more or less, pro-free speech, and I'm for that, and I understand that. But I sort of changed my aim, and I'm coming from a place of bridge building, more or less, and I want peace and I want prosperity, and I think it can be achieved. But something that I realized, and this took a great degree of empathy on my part, because I'm coming from this side of things, that and this is hard for me to say because they're novel ideas to me, but what I'm trying to say is that we, as in you, as in everyone here in this room, we are responsible for the growth and for the continuance of the growth of the radical left. And the only way the radical left is truly going to shrink from its somewhat monstrous size and its growing size is if we, and I'm going to generalize here, as men who initiate things, take responsibility for the current situation of things, and we must understand and empathize from their framework. Their arguments, they're not that well built. They're not logically coherent. But we must see
I'm with you, but we need to get to the question mark.
Right, there's really no question mark, and it's more of a statement, and I kind of just want you to see what you think, and more.
I mean, listen, I think that the only way for there to be any common agreement is for there to actually be agreement. So I'm not going to create a false agreement where there is none. I'm in favor of clarification in many cases. You're right that the great dearth that we have in the country right now is of people who have decided to shirk responsibility, and that's true on all sides of the aisle. I see it from populists on the right, and I see it from socialists on the left. I see it from people who believe that the government should take care of them on the right because they're a protected class, and I see it the same thing on the left. The only way the country is going to get better is if we re-embrace certain certain central values of the West that have always been true. The idea of innate human freedom to act, the idea that a limited government provides you with the innate freedom to act, the idea that there is a discoverable purpose in the universe toward which you can direct your reason, right? All of these things are deeply important. If we re-embrace those, then I think we can save the West. If not, then I think that we're bound to either atomize and separate into individuals who don't talk to one another, or we are bound to fall back into a sort of Tower of Babel belief that we can all build something greater together, which looks a lot more like fascism or communism. Thanks. Sorry, wait, I'm sorry.
Okay, first of all, could you sign my...
Yeah, if you got a pen. You have a pen, honey? Okay. That'll retail for at least $9 on eBay.
Okay, I can't pull it up. But recently, someone at my school compared Andrew Jackson to Trump in that he fired people who didn't agree with him or didn't do what he wanted them to do. What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, frankly, Andrew Jackson was fond of shooting people who didn't agree with him. So not quite the same, although Trump may yet shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue, and we'll see if he loses support. I think it's a strained comparison. I think that the only sort of comparison that makes sense along those lines is that Jackson was considered sort of an ignoramus at the time running against John Quincy Adams, and Trump is considered somewhat of the same. Jackson is considered a populist in the sense that he was connected with the people, and Trump repeats some of those same mantras. But the notion that there's some sort of great history of Jacksonian thought in Trump, I mean, I think that sentence doesn't make sense because it contains the words Trump and thought. So, like, Trump is a lot of things. He's a doer, he builds some stuff, he says a lot of things. He's not really a thinker. So the idea that he was sitting around reading biographies of Andrew Jackson, he's like, now I have some ideas about the National Bank. I have some deep-seated issues. Listen, I know Steve Bannon well, okay, and this was Steve Bannon's shtick, was that Donald Trump was just another Andrew Jackson type. Yeah, okay. There's a reason that Steve is basically a homeless person now. What a beautiful cluster of cells.
Thank you. He's 7 weeks old.
It's amazing. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question. I'm pro-vaccination. However, as a preschool teacher, I run into a lot of parents who aren't. So my question is, do you believe that people should be compelled by law to vaccinate themselves or their children?
So this is one of my more controversial positions. My answer is yes. The reason that my answer is yes is because the vaccination science is extraordinarily clear. Here is where I say my wife is a doctor. It is also true that all of the supposed links between, for example, vaccinations and autism are complete sheer nonsense. The person who originally put out those claims was forced to retract all of those claims. It just happens that autism happens to manifest about the same age that children are very often getting vaccinations, but correlation does not equal causation. The fact that we now see measles, which is a highly dangerous and highly contagious disease, being spread around schools is extraordinarily dangerous. There are certain, and when people argue about whether vaccinations should be compelled, after all, does it hurt anybody else? This is a question of externality. So as a conservative, I don't believe people should be compelled to do anything unless it causes externality to others. However, failing to vaccinate your kid does have externalities because herd immunity is necessary in order to protect people who can't actually protect themselves, kids who have cancer and can't get vaccinations, pregnant women who can't have vaccinations. So this is a really serious issue. With that said, should we always be looking to develop better forms of vaccines that, for example, have less of a rate of developing into Guillain-Barré syndrome, which can sometimes occur thanks to particular vaccine lines? Of course, we should always do better. But the rates of this are exorbitantly low, I mean extraordinarily low. And there's a reason that so many diseases that plagued humanity for legitimately tens of thousands of years legitimately disappeared from planet Earth as of about 50 or 60 years ago, once people realized what germ theory was and that vaccinations were actually effective. So I know there are a lot of folks who are upset with me actually about my vaccination position on this, but I do have a very strong vaccination position. And again, if it causes an externality not to vaccinate your kids, then it's a problem for you not to vaccinate your kids.
Got another question about abortion for you. What is your opinion on emergency contraceptives? Should they be allowed in any situation? Should they only be allowed in certain situations, such as, for example, taking it the day after the day of rape or incest, for example?
So I will beg off in terms of the biological knowledge in terms of emergency contraception in certain cases. What I will say is that on a principled basis, if what you are preventing is fertilization, I don't have a problem with it. If what you are preventing is implantation, I do have a problem with it. Right? This is the difference between sort of the Newt Gingrich position on abortion and mine. So Newt Gingrich suggests that life begins at implantation. That makes no biological sense to me. The minute that the conception occurs, you now have an individual life that has been formed. And implantation, for people who believe that men can become women and women can become men and therefore don't believe in science or don't know science, implantation is when the actual fertilized egg lands in the side of the uterus and begins to basically nest there, which is where it will be for the next several months. So if Plan B, for example, my understanding is that sometimes it prevents fertilization, sometimes it prevents implantation. If I don't know, I'm against it. If it's only preventing fertilization, I have no problem with it. If it prevents implantation, I do have a problem with it.
Hi, if more libertarian economic policy is preferable to you, why did the economy do quite well historically with left-leaning economic policies in place, more specifically in time period from the New Deal to Nixon?
So the economy did extraordinarily poorly from the time of the New Deal all the way up until World War II. UCLA economists suggest that the Great Depression was lengthened by a minimum of 8 years by the economic policies that were purveyed by FDR and his arbitrary and foolish economic policy, which really predated him. Hoover was instituting the same exact policies right after the crash of 1929. So those policies really extended from like 1929 all the way to the outbreak of World War I. The economic growth that took place until World War II, rather. The economic growth that took place in the aftermath of World War II was a result of several factors. One was actual deregulation of the economy. Remember, there was rationing during World War II. Also, the entire world was destroyed except for the United States. When you are the only mass producer still available on planet Earth and every other Western country has been decimated, that provides a pretty good export market, as it turns out. And so there wasn't a lot of competition in the marketplace. As other countries developed, then they were able to compete better in terms of manufacturing, which is why you see the car industry in the United States slowing down in the 1970s and 1980s. As far as the idea that economic growth is tied to heavy government interventionism, that obviously is untrue to the extent that the heavier the government intervention, the less economic growth there is. I don't have to cite Venezuela or Cuba. So the question is, even if you believe that government interventionism is good for the economy, which I don't, then where do you think the happy medium lies? Is it the policies of FDR and LBJ? Or is it possible that the policies of the early 1920s, which were economic boom times for the United States and were extraordinarily libertarian, are better economic policies? There's a reason that entrepreneurs, business owners seek out places where they are taxed less and regulated less. There's a reason that the United States is still the world's most powerful economy, and it's because of all the developed countries, we are the least regulated and in many cases the least taxed, although not on a corporate level. So government interventionism, the record that government interventionism has caused economic strength in the United States is scanty at best. I mean, that correlation does not even match up, in my opinion.
Hi, Ben. Big fan. I was wondering first if I could get a picture.
Sure. Yeah, you're gonna have to selfie it. Turn on. All right, here we go. You can let that haunt your dreams for the next few years.
Thank you. My question was about your opinion on Disneyland. Specifically, what are your favorite food, drinks, and rides, current and defunct?
That's what I haven't heard before. So Disneyland is a wonderful place. And in fact, in my family, like meaning me and my sisters, we actually had a rule. If you take a date to Disneyland and they can't enjoy Disneyland, don't marry this person. This person is a cynic and cannot have fun in life. Disneyland is a wonderful place. The food, I have to say, I'm limited in my choices. I keep kosher, so I bring food to the park with me when we go. I will admit that my wife and I and our children have an annual pass to Disneyland, so we go a lot. As far as, well, it actually is one of the beautiful things about Disneyland is that your experience of the park changes as your kids grow older. So when they're really little, you're going mainly to Fantasyland, and like my daughter likes to see the princesses and stuff. And then as they get older, you'll end up in Tomorrowland and be doing Space Mountain and stuff like that. When I was growing up, my favorite ride was Thunder Mountain. That was the place to be, was Thunder Mountain. So as you can see, I'm a thrill a minute.